Good morning. It's Election Day 2020. Who's going to win? Only the votes will tell the story. Indeed. Every vote counts. Don't forget that. Quarter number 2, day number 6, day 50 overall, the big 5-0. Tuesday, November 3rd, 2020. And your homeroom special is physical education. And again, you can stay in your team's room to do your PE together with your small group. Of course, we will be reading the next chapter of Picking Our President, Election Day. This one's called Election Day, that chapter. And you'll also be getting your blank document that will show you the same thing here, but it'll be white and you can color it in either with the program Paint or you can print it out and color it in. Last few days to memorize the preamble. And today we're moving on to complex sentences. We had simple and compound. Today it's complex sentences. And that has to do with one of the parts of the sentence has a subject and a verb, but it can't stand alone. Like, while I got the gist of your argument, it can't stand alone, but it has subject and verb. I still not agree with you. I still do not agree with you can stand on its own, but this part can't. So it's called a complex sentence. And we used the vocabulary and spelling words above. Gist, infer, invitation. There's a practice site for identifying complex sentences. There's another cool video on weather and measuring weather. And it's day number 2 for this, so make sure that you correct all the errors in there. And again, we are wrapping up our study of U.S. government and our election process this week. We will continue it till Friday and then start new units on Monday. We're still focusing on the geography of Florida. This is a great video that shows you the 4 different parts of our subtropical climate, which has everything to do with the geography of Florida, where we're located on the planet, our level above sea level, all those factors that go into creating our weather, our climate, and our geography. And the fact that we have on one side, Gulf of Mexico, on the other side, the Atlantic Ocean, and then below us, you have the beginning of the Caribbean Sea, and all of those factors play into our climate. If you haven't found your elevation yet, here is the site for that. And we're going to look at this one too today about what grows in Pinellas County. This is the same, the gifted block riddles that seemed to be a big hit yesterday in your small teams groups. And we have a video on the lightning capital of the world. Right here in Florida, mostly Central Florida. Definitely also Tampa Bay. Lots of lightning. So let's read about this election day. Chapter 6, the election. Finally, all the hoopla about the campaign is over, and it's time to make the big decision about who will be the nation's next president. Election day is always the first Tuesday following the first Monday in November. In many states, not Florida, schools, banks, and post offices are closed that day to give everybody a chance to go vote. But we make up for that because we have early voting and mail-in voting. Why was that day chosen? Well, the decision was made back in 1845 when most Americans worked on farms. November was chosen because the fall harvest should have been completed by then. The hard weather of winter hadn't hit yet, so people were still able to travel long distances on the roads if they had to, usually unpaved. Oh, that's right. Go back that far and yeah, paved roads were a rarity. to get to the polling place. Tuesday was chosen because it might take a whole day to get to the polling place. And if election day was on a Monday, people would have to leave on Sunday and miss church. And just about every single person in the United States at that time attended some sort of church on Sunday, and it was regarded as the sacred day of the week. If a local elected leader resigns or dies, a special election may be held to choose a successor. But for more than 150 years, Americans have voted for president on the first Tuesday following the first Monday in November. Well, how long are these polls open? Well, it depends on where you live. In most states, the polls open at 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning. They close that evening at 6 o'clock in Indiana, Kentucky, and Hawaii, and at 9 o'clock in Iowa, New York, and Rhode Island. Because the continental United States covers 5 time zones, and we'll be getting into time zones sometime in the second quarter, voting results on the East Coast come in before the West Coast. When it's dinner time in New York, it's still mid-afternoon in California. Some years, the TV networks have predicted the winner of the election before many people on the West Coast had even voted yet. How can they predict the winner in advance? All throughout Election Day, the TV networks and major news organizations race to predict the outcome of the election. They do it by taking what are called exit polls. Basically, they ask people leaving polling places which candidate they voted for. Obviously, they can't ask everybody in the whole country who they voted for, but they can ask a small sample of voters in specific parts of each state. This is called sampling. Let's say there's a town called Anytown. A news organization might do an exit poll of 100 people in any town and find out that 60 of them voted for the Republican candidate and 40 voted for the Democratic candidate. The news organization assumes that if those 100 residents of any town are voting 64 in favor of the Republican, the rest of any town would probably be voting that way too. Now, that's not always the case, but it's amazingly accurate. When you do correct scientific sampling of people's opinions or just about anything, you can get a clear view of what the whole picture is like. The Anytown data is fed into computers. The computers have data from previous elections stored inside them. By analyzing the way Anytown voted in the past and the way it seemed to be voting today, the news organization may be able to predict with confidence which candidate is going to get the most votes in Anytown. They may also be able to make predictions about other areas as well. After you finish dinner on election day, turn on the TV, radio, or computer. All the major networks will be covering the election. Results will be trickling in from all over the country. Computers will be furiously crunching numbers. Commentators will be looking for trends, trying to figure out what the early returns indicate. Is the South going for one candidate? Is a candidate doing better or worse than the most recent polls would have led people to believe? You'll see mounting tallies of votes in each state. At first, they'll only have 1% of the vote counted, then 3%, then 5%. Soon the networks will start to declare winners. In the state of Nebraska, they will say, with 5% of the vote in, we project John Doe to be the winner. 5%. Again, you might think, that's crazy. Why don't they wait for 100%? Because you really don't have to. People are kind of predictable when you do sampling. You might think everybody is so unique, but really we fall into patterns quite easily. Do they ever get it completely wrong? Rarely, but in 1948, all the polls have predicted a big victory for Thomas E. Dewey, the governor of New York. On election day, everyone was so sure that Dewey was going to win that the Chicago Daily Tribune printed an edition with the huge headline, "Dewey defeats Truman." Well, when all the votes have been counted, Harry Truman won the election. There's a very famous photo of Truman holding up the front page of the newspaper with that incorrect headline. Of course, that was before computers made it possible to analyze election results with much more scientifically. Do they always predict so fast? Not until recent elections. Back in 1916, Charles Evans Hughes was challenging President Woodrow Wilson. Hughes was ahead in the early voting, but not by much. The election came down to how California voted. The two candidates were neck and neck, and it wasn't until 2 days later that all the votes were counted. Wilson won the state of California by just 4,000 votes out of millions and won the election. What difference does it make how one state votes? Isn't it the grand total of all the votes that matter? You should know better by now. It's the Electoral College, not the popular vote. This may come as a shock to you, but the answer is no. The total of all the votes, which is called the popular vote, does not determine the winner of the presidential election. It all started, as many of our traditions do, with the founding fathers. As educated and fair-minded as they were, they did not feel that ordinary people were capable of choosing the president wisely. To be fair to the founding fathers, many Americans could not read in the 1700s, and there was no radio, TV, or internet to keep the public informed. Communication was slow. It took just 3 days to travel the 90 miles from New York City to Philadelphia. In any case, they devised a system for electing the president that was based on the vote of the Electoral College and not the popular vote. Electoral College, is that where you go to be an electrician? No. You better sit down and look at this. Look yourself in a room and don't do any texting for a few minutes. Each of our 50 states has a certain number of electoral votes equal to its number of senators and representatives. For example, California has 2 senators and 53 members of the House of Representatives, so California has 55 electoral votes, the most in the country. Wyoming, on the other hand, has only 3 electoral votes because they have a much smaller population. Wyoming has 2 senators, like every other state, but only 1 member in the House of Representatives. Densely populated states like New York, Texas, Illinois, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and they left out Florida. Florida, Mr. Gutman, have large numbers of electoral votes, and less populated states, Alaska, Delaware, Iowa, Idaho, Nevada, Vermont, North Dakota, have just a few electoral votes. Altogether, the country has 538 electoral votes. On election day, the popular vote is tallied for each state. Whichever candidate wins the popular vote in each state wins the electoral votes, all of them in that state. So whether candidate Doe wins the state of California by a single vote or a million votes, he wins all of California's 55 electoral votes. To win the presidency, a candidate has to win a majority of the electoral votes. So when a candidate has won 270, that's a majority and he's the winner. So 270 is the magic number. So what's that college thing in Electoral College? Well, about a month after Election Day, electors will meet in all the state capitals. There is 1 elector for each of the 538 electoral votes. These electors are pledged to vote for the candidate who won the popular vote. They cast electoral votes on behalf of the people in their state and officially elect the president. Collectively, these electors are called the Electoral College, or group of electors. What's the point of that if everybody knew the electoral vote totals on election night? It's a formality. In other words, it's something that is done even though it's not necessary. The tradition goes back to the early days of this country when the leaders did not feel the common man, women were not even considered, should choose the president. They felt that a few educated men should make this important decision. The system was originally set up so that people would vote for their state representatives. Those representatives would select electors, and the electors would vote to determine the president. The founding fathers did not know that political parties would spring up to choose candidates. They had no idea that 200 years later, the people would be narrowing down the list of candidates through primary elections. The system is actually much fairer today because millions of average Americans make the decision instead of a few people. And these average Americans now are required to go to school, so we're far more educated than we were back in the early part of the 1800s. Everybody knows who wins the election on election night, if it's declared, but still, for the sake of tradition, the Electoral College gathers in December to officially elect the president. The Electoral College system is not perfect. There have been many efforts over the years to change it or to get rid of it completely. But the one thing going for the Electoral College is that it has worked pretty well for more than 200 years. And as we say in America, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Why don't they just add up all the votes and whichever candidate has the most votes wins the election? That would be simpler, but it certainly necessarily wouldn't be fair. Think about this. If a candidate with the most popular vote won the election, candidates would only campaign in areas that have a lot of cities, major cities. If you could win the people in those cities, you could probably win the election, even if most of the rest of the country voted against you. Similarly, the president in office would do all he could to favor the more populated areas, because the areas with fewer people wouldn't matter very much. So in other words, America has many different geographical locations. There's vast tracts of farmland in the Midwest and the West. There's vast tracts where very few people live. Every state has its own unique quality, and the people that live in rural areas, RURAL, as opposed to urban areas, have different values, have different things that they think about, have different things that they think are important. So if it were just a popular vote, then indeed, campaigns would just be focused on city people, urban people, people that are used to traffic and tall buildings and busy lifestyles, and the people that lived more rural lives, quieter, slower, um, a lot more physical labor, they would just be ignored, and their concerns would be ignored. It is possible to get the most popular votes, the most unpopular votes, and still lose the election. All right, we will stop there. And looking forward to seeing you very soon. And the rest of this week, we'll be talking about the results. Hopefully tonight, we will have a clear winner, because if it's not clear, it might go on for a day, 2 days, a week, maybe a month. Oh, nobody wants that. Nobody wants that. Everybody wants it to be solved so we can move on with the business of living our lives, running the government, and kind of getting back to normal, even though we're in the middle of a pandemic, so it's hard to get back to normal. See you soon.